This video is about making the world a better place, a kinder, gentler, more peaceful and productive world, a world that optimizes personal freedom. Then it must also be about replacing dysfunction, the ethic of control, power, and force, with a new ethic of cooperation, caring, and compassion. Many people are thinking about and working on this transformational goal from many different directions, from generating more positive pop song lyrics to reimagining our institutions and social systems. Many more are simply waiting for someone else to find a solution. Actually, finding a viable solution is not that hard. It's the implementation of that solution that is so difficult. A problem that makes the proverbial impossibility of herding cats seem trivial. I'm working on such a solution myself. I will use science as the vehicle driving wide adoption and implementation. This certainly will eventually work and is probably the only approach that can work. History indicates that a better, more explanatory fundamental understanding of great personal and collective value that can be applied universally is the only thing that has ever induced major societal paradigm shifts in the past. For instance, the move from nomadic to agriculture, adoption of metals led the bronze to iron to steel, the machines of the Industrial Revolution, and lastly, personal computing, ushering in the dawning of the information age. Each builds upon the last, yet each step comes much more quickly than the one before. Progress naturally accelerates. The more one learns, the easier it is to learn more. The next big paradigm shift is now waiting in the wings for a sizable minority of humanity to develop the necessary concepts and attitudes. It will be the culmination of all the others. This shift is when humans learn to cooperate and care about each other, when the pie becomes large enough for us all to share, and when compassion becomes as compelling as profit. This is the kinder, gentler, more peaceful, and productive world most of us are looking for. Now, let's get hypothetical. I want you to use your imagination. You must completely suspend your disbelief and give your imagination free rein. We are going to imagine the best of all possible futures. What if there were a new, more complete, logic-based science that, more precisely and accurately described our physical reality? Imagine also that it was able to accurately describe our subjective reality, creating a new science of the subjective world of mind, as well as a new and better science of the objective world of matter. Imagine that this new science solved the so-called hard problem of consciousness while eliminating all mind-matter paradoxes. Additionally, imagine that this new science clearly solves all current fundamental paradoxes in philosophy, metaphysics, theology, and in both the hard and soft sciences. Finally, imagine that this new science fills in the missing fundamental knowledge and unknowns in almost every academic field, while creating no new paradoxes and no additional unknowns. If you can imagine all of that being true, then you will realize that this imaginary new science would constitute a complete theory of everything. Yes, truly everything, mind and matter. It would scientifically and logically, clearly and completely explain both the objective and subjective worlds, the worlds of body, mind, and spirit. Now, finally, imagine how this would change our perspective, our attitudes, our sense of self, knowing, if we knew with certainty, who and what we were, where we came from, and what our purpose is. How could that change our perspective. The understanding ushered in by this imaginary new, more general and complete science would reorient our perspective to encompass the whole of us, spirit, mind, and body. What was most important and meaningful in us and to us would rise to the forefront. Cooperation, caring, and compassion would eventually and naturally become a fundamental attribute of our interactions with others. Ethics and morality would be more valued by our culture than the control, power, and force that money now buys. Talk about a paradigm shift. This imagined new science would usher in the greatest of all paradigm shifts. Okay, enough imagining. Now that we have imagined the best of all possible futures, let's look at where we are today in the year 2024. Currently, we, that is, our culture in general, as well as doctors, lawyers, engineers, left-brain thinkers, and scientists in particular, believe that physicalism expresses the fundamental truth about our reality. Physicalism is commonly equated with materialism. Most of us believe we live in a physical universe of matter that abides by rules we call science. There's nothing more and nothing less. That's it. Now, whether we hold that belief fully or partially, let's consider how that belief affects us. The perspective or viewpoint from within an objective physical reality looks like this. An objective physical reality is self-contained. There is nothing else. The paranormal is fundamentally impossible. All fundamental facts must be objective. All opinions are subjective and cannot be fundamental or trusted to be true. Reality is formed only by material objective facts. Feelings are not real. They are imagined. Any objective reality is all about physical matter and the rules that pertain to physical matter, with nothing else being real or of fundamental significance or importance. The dominant ethic concerns controlling what exists in the outside world. Thus, the coin of the realm in any objective physical reality will be used to exert control over the outside world, which includes other people. This requires physical power and force. In other words, the application of control, power, and force to compel reality and others to meet your needs is fundamental to a physicalist reality inhabited by humans. Now, we want money because money buys control, power, and force. But what we really want is control, power, and force, and money is just the means to get it. The coin of the realm in an objective physical reality is truly control, power, and force. The ethic of control, power, and force will tend to permeate and dominate all relationships, activities, and institutions within any objective physical reality. Love, caring, and compassion are seen only as imagined opinions in a reality dominated by physicalism. They are of little significance within the physicalist reality and will remain so as long as the majority of people believe that their reality is an objective physical reality. In a physicalist reality, ethics and morals are also seen as opinions, and thus neither fundamental nor binding to a sufficient control, power, and force. For the majority of its inhabitants, an objective physical reality is a bleak, sterile, often abusive and violent place with no soul. What I mean by no soul is no fundamental meaning beyond the existence of the physical world. The physicalist world is the only reality that most scientists believe exists. That our physical universe is an objective physical reality is an almost universally accepted cultural belief, because people do not see or appreciate any other possibilities, nor do they see the dysfunctional logical consequences. They can only see the filter of their ingrained physicalist viewpoint, that hard facts are always more reliable than imagined opinions. They cannot yet see the hard facts that emerge within the science of subjective reality. Can you see how a pervasive cultural belief in physicalism, with its insuppressible ethic of control, power, and force, must necessarily create a dysfunctional society? Earlier, you imagined the best of all possible worlds and discovered that a reality not based on control, power, and force was essential to develop a kinder, gentler, more supportive world. You can begin to implement that vision by opening yourself to the possibility of your reality not being an objective physical reality. And if you apply all the facts, both objective and subjective, native to your reality, those facts will support an ethic of caring, cooperation, and compassion, as well as provide a good work ethic and a strong drive to contribute. Our kinder, gentler, more supportive world will form into being when a large minority of our population realizes that we don't live in an objective physical reality. We just believe that we do. Consciousness, not matter, is fundamental, and our science is on the threshold of figuring that out. 100 years ago, physics experienced a major breakthrough. Physicists created the science of quantum physics to better understand and explain the double-slit experiment. They were ecstatic about this new breakthrough. Surprisingly, matter, physicalism, and determinism did not describe the fundamental structure of reality after all. Although physicalism was clearly wrong, its alternative appeared both mysterious and elusive. Most of those at the forefront of creating this new science agreed that the fundamental structure of reality had something to do with information and consciousness, but they could not produce any sort of theory that was rational. Consequently, Niels Bohr, one of the leaders of this group of physicists, called all the world's best scientists to a meeting in Copenhagen. Fortunately, they all posed at least once for this historical moment. Of course, Albert Einstein is front and center. M.A. Lorentz is to his right, and Madame Curie is to Lorentz's right. Most of the creators and facilitators of quantum mechanics were also there. Creators, Bohr, Heisenberg, Planck, Schrödinger, and collaborators, Pauli, Bragg, Dirac, Compton, and de Broglie. Bohr's plan was to simply describe the results of their research and to discuss the huge paradigm shift that these results implied. Here we have Eugene Wigner and John von Neumann. Wigner was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. First is a quote from Wigner. "The laws of quantum mechanics cannot be formulated without recourse to the concept of consciousness." John von Neumann, a child prodigy, was a polymath genius who made seminal contributions to mathematics, physics, computer science, and engineering. Together, Wigner and von Neumann created the consciousness causes collapse interpretation of quantum mechanics, in which consciousness is postulated to be necessary for the completion of the process of quantum measurement. Albert Einstein, also a Nobel laureate, at first doubted the veracity of the emerging quantum physics, famously saying, "God does not play dice with the universe." But after several other experiments verified the correctness of quantum mechanics, he engaged it fully. Here are 3 quotes. "Reality is merely an illusion. albeit a very persistent one. If we think of the field as being removed, there is no space which remains, since space does not have an independent existence. And finally, hence, it is clear that the space of physics is not, in the last analysis, anything given in nature or independent of human thought. It is a function of our conceptual scheme, that is, of our mind. Next is Max Planck, another Nobel Prize winner, with 3 quotes. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. And finally, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Here you see Niels Bohr, yet another Nobel laureate, with 2 quotes. The common sense view of the world, in terms of objects that really exist out there independently of our observation, that is, objective reality, totally collapses in the face of the quantum factor. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Next is Werner Heisenberg, yes, another Nobel Prize winner, with 2 quotes. The atoms, or elementary particles themselves, are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. Separation of the observer from the phenomenon to be observed is no longer possible. Finally, we end with a quote from Erwin Schrödinger. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else. You have now heard from all of the primary founders of quantum physics. It is unfortunate that those much less accomplished would toss out the ideas of these men simply because they were unable to understand or comprehend what these extraordinary, brilliant physicists found obvious. It is well known that exceptional brilliance usually comes with a bigger picture that is unavailable to the average man. These people represented the brightest and the best. Together, they created an immense collective intelligence that to the present day has never been approached, much less duplicated. They were able to correctly intuit the right answer, but did not know how to turn their intuitive knowing into logical science. The key concept they needed, the possibility of a computed reality, would not be invented for another 6 or 7 decades. The Copenhagen results and their tentative mathematical representation evolved to dominate the new science of quantum physics for the next 5 decades. Meanwhile, the mathematical formulation of quantum theory grew quickly, while fundamental understanding of what, how, and why made no progress at all. How could a probability wave collapse to become a physical particle? They knew that what was required was a new perspective, a major paradigm shift, a different point of view, something fundamental, and thus simple and elegant. And with this new perspective, everything would come together in one coherent understanding. Because quantum physics and relativity were logically incompatible and limited in scope, it was clear that there was some overall more fundamental understanding from which both relativity and quantum physics could be derived. In pursuit of this goal, Albert Einstein coined the phrase theory of everything, TOE, and started working on a little toe he called unified field theory. He failed, so did everyone else who came after him. Einstein spent the last 20 years of his life trying to build a scientific foundation under both quantum physics and relativity that would become the theory of everything. This quote defines his frustration. One has to find a possibility to avoid the continuum together with space and time altogether, but I have not the slightest idea what kind of elementary concepts could be used in such a theory. Einstein is saying that one must see space and time as discrete or digital, like pixels, and thus computable, and that the elementary concepts required by such a theory must lie beyond space and time, thus outside of our physical universe. Yes, this means that the concepts necessary to solve this puzzle must lie within a realm that seems non-physical to us. At the end, he confesses that he has no idea how to proceed to develop such a theory. The result of Einstein's failure was that 30 years after the inception of quantum physics, no one had any idea of where to start, much less how to proceed. The Copenhagen results became the less intimidating Copenhagen interpretation, which is now one of no less than 13 separate explanations of quantum weirdness. During those 3 decades, a fundamental shift occurred. Physicists were now growing tired of searching for that new paradigm that would finally allow physicalism to explain quantum physics. Physicalism explain quantum physics? And they were chafing at the woo-woo silliness that began attaching itself to the so-called observer paradox that clearly connected consciousness to the Copenhagen results. Eventually, that consciousness connection was finally erased altogether by an unsupportable generalization of entanglement. Thus, the somewhat embarrassing Copenhagen interpretation was finally exorcised because it was flagrantly incompatible with physicalism. The quotes from the founding fathers of quantum physics that we saw earlier were now seen by the mainstream within physics as the result of overactive imaginations of some naive people who simply didn't understand. From ecstatic breakthrough to dead silence. Initially, everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for that new perspective of reality that would elucidate all, but never did. Physicists initially recognized that they needed a different way of looking at reality, a new paradigm. But after 7 decades of trying, they gave up, banging their heads against that intractable wall, and did the next best thing. They simply denied that there ever was a problem in the first place. Their conclusion? Problem? What problem? Quantum science is just naturally weird science. No one will ever understand the mystery of quantum physics. Mother Nature simply has some secrets she means to keep. Fortunately, we have the math. We don't really need to understand the why. What followed was a backward leap by physicists to renew their embrace of physicalism and determinism. Shut up and calculate became the mantra of moving forward. The way to hide defeat, claim victory, and move on. That is still where the science of physics is today. However, a few of the best minds persevered throughout this regression. For example, 2 of our finest physicists, Edward Fredkin and John Archibald Wheeler, claimed that our reality was discrete and computable, it from bit, the participatory universe. These ideas provided a new perspective that accurately claims our reality is information-based, and a significant minority of physicists agreed with them. As before, after stating the obvious, nobody knew how to proceed. At least for these physicists, the wall, that is, the understanding, the true nature of reality, was a challenge, still worth thinking about. Now, 100 years have gone by since the inception of quantum physics, and no new understanding or new perspective has arisen until now. But first, consider this. If this new perspective is so impossibly difficult to find, it must be a totally bizarre paradigm shift that, for some fundamental reason, has been impossible for a century's worth of mainstream physicists to imagine. Furthermore, it must exist entirely outside of physicalism, because that is where everybody has been looking in vain for a century. Thus, the conclusion is, if this new perspective did not, at first mention, sound impossibly wild and crazy to the physicalist ears, it could not possibly be the shift we need to launch our civilization into the next level of understanding. Science moved on. Eventually, parapsychology became an accepted thing. Remote viewing went to the Pentagon, and a tsunami of other studies in reputable universities revealed high-quality, repeatable psi experiments. If this is news to you, read Dean Radin. With the closed door of physicalism cracked open a little bit by the serious study of paranormal experiences, we also learned about NDEs, intent-altering statistical distributions at Pear Labs, and Libet's readiness potential, to name a few. Eventually, a host of paradoxes, new and old, like the placebo effect, small fluctuations in the speed of light, and the anthropic principle, continued to surprise and frustrate both the soft and hard sciences. For the most part, mainstream scientists reacted to this influx of broader thinking by closing both their eyes and their minds, sticking their fingers in their ears and declaring that everybody but us must be hallucinating. Now, here I am, a physicist, and why am I so different than my brethren? I am unusual because, although I had a highly successful 35-year career as a professional physicist, my day job, I also had a 50-year and continuing career as a consciousness researcher. It's my night job. To make a long story very short, in graduate school, I had a mind-opening psi experience. Then, I eventually connected with Bob Monroe, author of Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journey, and Ultimate Journey. I learned how to go out of body on demand. Now, out of body, or OBE, is a terrible metaphor because consciousness is not to be found in a body. Think of OBE as a perfectly normal ability to explore the nature of consciousness from the inside rather than the outside, and to do that with enough consistency and precision to perform experimental research, to ferret out the hard facts of both consciousness and reality from within the non-physical realm of the larger consciousness system, LCS. It was primarily this capability that enabled me to eventually discover that new perspective, that new paradigm that science had been seeking for a century. After 25 years of research within the non-physical realm of consciousness, I thought I had finally understood how and why consciousness worked. I published the trilogy of books, My Big Toe, MBT, in February 2003, and several years after that, I could derive the missing facts, the paradoxes that underlay the foundations of both quantum physics and relativity. As an aside, if you wish to do this sort of research yourself to gain firsthand knowledge and experience by exploring within the larger consciousness system, You can find the necessary tools at my website, my-big-toe.com. By 2016, I had solved all the outstanding paradoxes I could find, presented 5 new quantum mechanics experiments to a gathering in Los Angeles that would provide evidence for my theory, and had fully developed the new paradigms needed to support a more advanced physics. The founding fathers of quantum physics were correct. The mysterious wave function collapse did indeed have something to do with consciousness and information. As it turns out, consciousness is fundamental, and everything else can be derived from consciousness, including physics. All reality is information-based. Consciousness is an information system. Consciousness is not created by the brain. The brain, along with everything else, is created by consciousness. My theory scientifically and logically explains exactly why and how that works. These new paradigms are both elegant and simple and make absolutely everything make sense. They generate a new, more general physics that more fully and more accurately describes the objective world, as well as provide a fundamental new science of the subjective world, something we have never had before. Past and current fundamental paradoxes are now solved, with no new paradoxes created. All this with only one assumption, that consciousness exists. Here, consciousness is simply defined as awareness with a choice. This fundamental foundational understanding requires neither physics nor math as a prerequisite. Foundations are usually simple, elegant, and straightforward. Complexity is then built upon them. When the foundation shifts, everything above it must shift as well. This paradigm shift is much larger than any before it. One might guess that to be true because of how difficult it has been to find it, and by how dramatically it will change every individual's worldview. This is not just about physics. It also strongly impacts every science, including the social sciences and all of the humanities as well. And more importantly, it will affect everyone on a personal level, moving attitudes away from the now dominant ethic of control, power, and force, an ethic that has produced arrogance and greed and other socially undesirable attitudes, to an ethic of cooperation, caring, and compassion, which, among other things, provides an optimization of individual choice through sustainable mutual support. So, what feedback have I heard from other physicists? Still mostly silence, except for a trickle of individuals who have taken the time to understand this new perspective. Granted, it is extremely difficult for most to grasp, not because it's inherently difficult, but because it runs so counter to our cultural, technical, and philosophical beliefs. It takes me about 3 hours to explain these new paradigms if I am not interrupted by a storm of questions. However, it takes most people at least 4 months of serious thinking about it and asking and receiving answers to many questions before most of the logical consequences of those 3 hours begin to sink in. And some never get it because they give up before insight dawns on a bigger picture. Anyone of average intelligence can easily understand the basics. It's understanding all the logical consequences and how they interact and intersect with your life that takes time. There is lots of supporting interest from the fields of engineering, computer science, and medicine because these fields are results-driven, not theory-driven. In June 2017, I published a peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of International Quantum Foundations, co-authored by a Caltech mathematician and a JPL physicist, that presented a set of quantum mechanics experiments that could provide some evidence for my theory. It should be no surprise that the quotes you have heard from the best, most brilliant, and competent physicists of our time turned out to be absolutely spot on. I feel that if those men were still alive, they would all be supportive of my work. The MBT model is exactly the answer they were looking for, and it has all the properties they knew it must have. And that is not because I worked toward that end. I did not. My work was completed before I discovered these esteemed gentlemen agreed with me. I have a YouTube channel with over 82,000 subscribers and well over 10 million views. It's a growing thing. I also have a new website that will fill in all the details that I don't have time to discuss here. That's my-big-toe.com. This video was designed to be a YouTube video, so every so often we must pause for an advertisement. However, you may stop listening after 4 seconds. The quantum physics experiments are funded and managed by a seriously underfunded 501c3 nonprofit, tax-deductible, charitable organization called CUSAC, Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness, CUSAC.org. We are near to having the first experiment done at 2 universities. The next experiment is even more expensive and more interesting. We could use some financial support. How does one tell if a theory is good or bad? Richard Feynman, in a lecture to beginning physics majors, described a time when the best and brightest of us put forth the theory that the heavenly bodies were pushed through their orbits by angels. He asked his class, "How does one know that this is not a good theory?" A reply from the audience immediately said, "Because it's stupid." Feynman emphatically said, "No. In physics, a theory is not judged wrong because it doesn't support our current beliefs. There is usually very little, if any, difference between our current beliefs and our current knowledge, and both could be wrong. A theory like the angel theory is judged wrong because it explains little, requires too many assumptions, and creates more unknowns. A theory is good if it explains all the known facts, accurately predicts new facts, creates no more unknowns, and requires very few assumptions. This statement describes the MBT theory perfectly and simply represents good science. Political correctness and deeply held beliefs dominate the mainstream within our culture and within a largely insular academia. Unfortunately, new theories today are mainly judged according to how well they support current beliefs. The MBT theory of consciousness and reality provides a more general physics of the objective world and a brand new science of the subjective world. It logically and scientifically derives the Copenhagen results from nothing more than a deep understanding of consciousness. It explains the source of the fundamental physical parameters, such as mass, time, space, charge, etc. It explains what preceded the Big Bang, the anthropic principle, why the speed of light is a constant, as well as why tiny variations occasionally occur in the speed of light. It explains particle tunneling, non-random biological mutations, chaos theory, Lebesgue's readiness potential, psi phenomena, and provides new insights into Freud's theory of mind, the Fermi paradox, the accelerating universe, ontology, epistemology, cosmology, theology, and philosophy. It finally ends the Platonic argument between idealists and physicalists, and it provides insight into NDEs, near-death experiences, the Mandela effect, and many other mysteries of both psi and consciousness. It explains what happens when you die, why you have a purpose, and what that purpose is, and how to make the world a better, more sustainable, supportive, kind, and caring place. This model of reality, or TOE, is simple and elegant. Previous complex and difficult problems are reduced to simple problems with obvious solutions. So far, no fundamental problem has been discovered that this theory cannot clearly solve. We have tried for years to find issues. We have found none. Also, it creates no additional problems. Bottom line, it is very unlikely that this big TOE could achieve the level of success that it has achieved without being largely correct. I and many others are convinced that this TOE will one day be adopted by mainstream science because it simply represents better physics. The truth is not a fragile thing. It will eventually rise to the top of the pile of competing ideas. And when it does, this understanding will change everything. Right now is the best time to build that on-ramp to a better future. That building is now ongoing, and we need as much support and assistance as we can get. Thank you.